It's Ben Dailey again to talk to you a little bit more about the R&D tax credit. That kind of leads to the next logical question of, if this is so expansive and so widely available, why isn't it more widely used? And there's a couple of big reasons for that. So first of all, the IRS and the government acknowledges that this is kind of an underused incentive, but they have a much harder time figuring out what changes they could make to it in order to make it a lot more helpful for smaller businesses. So kind of the first hurdle people run up against is you've got to go through your accounting records, and this has to be done by somebody who's not just an accountant, but who's got the requisite like scientific and technical knowledge to understand what you're doing and almost write up a report to the IRS describing what it is you're doing that qualifies and how this certain category of R&D costs is different than your general like operating expenses. And there's kind of a small industry that's sprung up around preparing these studies for businesses. So that's kind of the challenge that we have to get across first, is when we talk to a client about this, we're usually telling them, now you need to bring in an outside consultant who's going to help you go through your records and establish that what you're doing actually qualifies for this credit. So then that kind of brings us to the second problem with the R&D credit, is once you've done all the work to establish that, yeah, you're actually doing something that qualifies, now we have to get into all the computational hurdles, and that's where your CPA can help you out. Because once you've established the amount of your eligible costs that could qualify you for the credit, we've got to get through a variety of hurdles before that credit can actually provide a tax benefit to the business, or if you're operating as a pass-through entity, to the owner of the business. So I know that all sounds kind of like a lot of work, and you may be wondering at this point, is the benefit really there? And for a lot of taxpayers, the answer is yes. Because what you have to remember is that this just isn't available for businesses that are undertaking a new venture, launching a new product line, developing a new service to sell. A lot of times what we find is when taxpayers actually look at these studies, they find that a lot of the costs they're already spending will qualify them for a credit. So it ends up being a nice bonus that, in addition to any new undertaking you might be considering, you might already be spending money that qualifies you for the credit, and you're able to get that on an amended tax return. So oftentimes you can get money back for costs that you've already spent. And that's a nice additional incentive to do one of these studies. So another thing that's very helpful is we work with a number of these consultants who prepare R&D credit studies. They'll typically do an initial assessment for a client up front. They'll talk to you, and in a short amount of time they'll be able to tell you, how much is the potential amount of the credit. They'll be able to discuss your operations with you and tell you that you're doing a qualifying activity, and usually for no cost give you an assessment of, if they did perform the full study, what do they think you might be able to get. So after you have that initial assessment, which again is usually in most cases free, your CPA can run that through a tax projection for you and just give you an idea of how quickly you'd be able to use the benefit of that credit. So kind of in summary, we've talked a lot about the benefits of the credit and a lot of the challenges in taking it. One of the questions we get might be, why is now the time to look at it? And that goes back to another favorable law change. Really, in 2016, it was the first year this credit made a lot of sense for small businesses like the kind we serve to look at this credit. Previously, it was limited by something called the alternative minimum tax. If you operated your business as a pass-through entity and you live in a state with a very high tax rate like Maine, you typically paid AMT. And that was one of the big restrictions on getting a current tax benefit of this credit. So would often talk to people about this, end up saying, yes, you do something that qualifies. Yes, you could get a credit. No, it's not actually going to help you. Well, 2016 was the first year that all changed. And in part of the legislative reform, Congress eliminated one of the biggest hurdles. So we're finally seeing now that it can make a lot of sense for a business to do this today, or look at claiming it on an amended return for 2016. So hopefully that was educational and informative. If you've got any other questions about the R&D credit, feel free to contact me, Ben Dailey, at 207-523-3328, or you can email me bd@macpage.com.